Do as they say, don't do as they do. They lay heavy burdens on people's shoulders and don't lift a finger. So we're going to talk about hypocrisy, heavy burdens, and authority. Hypocrisy. Do as they say, not as they do. So they're obviously not being coherent. Don't raise your hand, but are you a hypocrite? Am I a hypocrite? Are you sure? So then what is a hypocrite becomes a question. Again, don't raise your hand, but who here can say, I always live, well, I don't think we have to worry about this one. I always live up to God's standard. I'm looking at the sisters now. No. So no one except the Blessed Mother can say, I bat 1,000. So are we a bunch of hypocrites? Because we profess to be followers of Christ and we obviously don't follow him perfectly. Well, that depends. I preached about this before, but it's an important point. Are you trying sincerely to do what he asks? Okay. Do you always succeed? Right? No. That's called weakness. If you don't try and you're only interested in appearance, then okay, yeah, you gotta be careful. That's a problem. But if you're sincerely trying and you fall short, but keep trying, that's weakness. Now, we don't give in or give up either, but make the distinction because it's an important one, right? It's an important one. Heavy burdens. They lay heavy burdens on people's shoulders and they don't lift a finger. What is he talking about? I think he's talking primarily about not the moral code, I'll get back to that in a second, right? But all these rules and traditions that the Pharisees established, right, that weren't even necessarily God's law, and they just kept piling on. There were like hundreds of Pharisaical prescriptions, right, that people had to fulfill. You know, the washing your hands before a meal. Okay, yes, it's hygienic, but you get the idea, right? And if you didn't do it, you were doing wrong. You remember the apostles grabbing some grain as they're walking? And they're like, how can they do that? And Jesus is like, hey, back off, right? So that, I think, is what he's speaking about primarily. Then the question becomes, okay, can we lay heavy burdens on people with the moral law? I guess the answer would be yes in theory, if it's applied scrupulously, right? But the moral law per se, while not always easy, it's easier to live morally than to not live morally. It's a challenge because, well, we fall short, right? Yeah, oh, I should have been patient. Oh, I shouldn't have got, right, angry, whatever. Okay, so it's a challenge in that regard, but it's less burdensome to carry less sin. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Right? Again, not because we don't have to work at it, that's the difficulty, but the living with God's law as opposed to living, far from it is lighter, is easier, it's doable. It's doable on two ways. God is not unreasonable what he asks, but more importantly still, because he's like, you know what, you're going to need my grace to be able to do this, but I offer it to you. That's the heavy burdens. And the final point, and we can sometimes skip over that, whenever this passage comes up, I think the first thing that jumps out at us is, well, they're not doing it, right? Hypocrites, okay? But he does say, do as they say, because they have the authority. They have sat on the throne of Moses. Do as they say. So he doesn't say, listen, they're not perfect, so you don't have to listen to them. He didn't say that. God has always respected legitimate authority. Not because the people in authority are perfect. And we're not talking about papal infallibility here. Right? Okay? This includes civil authority too. Parents. Parents perfect? Would the perfect parent please raise his or her hand? Right? Mother superior. I was superior for a while in our community, and I guarantee you. And yet, read the lives of the saints, and they're like, obey your confessor, obey your superior. The only time you don't is if they ask you to do something immoral. Then you don't. If it's clearly immoral, then don't. What about political authority, if it's an evil regime and all that? Okay, I can't develop this theme too much, but the short answer is, to the degree that they espouse immorality, to that degree do they actually lose their authority. Because we must obey God before man. But to the degree that they don't, and that legitimate laws, we must obey. And I think why? Because God needs us humble. And if we make ourselves our own complete autonomous self, and I don't have to refer to anyone, who's going to want to live with you? Right? We can become so proud, so egotistical, so self-referential, and God's like, no. And then the consolation that an external authority implies. Who doesn't enjoy going to confession? Maybe not the confessing part, but the absolution part. You're like, phew. Why? Because you confide in God's authority through the imperfect instrument of the human being. Children, obey your parents. Good. That could be its own homily. But so God respects authority, not because the person in authority is perfect, but if it's legitimately exercised in that which is moral and just, you should obey. Think of this. The Magi found the Christ child when they lost the star, thanks to Herod. Chew on that one for a while. So, weakness instead of hypocrisy, heavy burdens. Our Lord's moral laws are not heavy. And yes, God works through authoritative figures. Please stand.